Case 1. Ryan Michael Dumbler. June 15th, 2023, Anchorage, Alaska. The first hints of dawn were still an hour away when Anchorage dispatchers received an urgent call about gunfire. The location, near the intersection of Demand Boulevard and King Street, specifically behind a utility box serving the Global Credit Union branch. Responding officers discovered a grim scene. 51-year-old John William Martin Freeley deceased, his body riddled with multiple gunshot wounds. He'd been sleeping when the attack occurred, making him entirely defenseless against his assailant. What set this homicide apart from typical street violence wasn't just a brutality, but the victim's identity. John Martin was no ordinary homeless individual. His life had been a tapestry of controversy, international incidents, and unwavering determination that had captured headlines across multiple continents. Martin's origins trace back to Alaska's Kenai Peninsula. His adult life took a dark turn in 1995 when, at age 23, he faced conviction for engaging in inappropriate sexual contact with a teenager, a 15-year-old foster child under his supervision. The legal system sentenced him to 8 years behind bars. This incarceration cost him dearly. His marriage crumbled, and contact with his 3 biological children evaporated completely. Following his release from custody, Martin sought connection through the emerging technology of internet messaging. He established a relationship with a woman living in China, and by 2007, they had married. Their union produced a son in Guangdong province. However, Martin's attempt to build a family faced immediate obstacles. United States authorities revoked his passport due to outstanding child support obligations. His status as a registered offender created additional barriers, preventing him from sponsoring his wife and child's immigration to America. Ultimately, Martin returned to Anchorage without them, carrying the weight of another fractured family. Life in Alaska's largest city took on a nomadic quality for Martin. He embraced religious faith and adopted an outdoor lifestyle, living on the streets. In 2011, his situation became a form of political theater when he established a protest encampment directly outside Anchorage City Hall. For 6 consecutive months, Martin maintained his presence there, demonstrating against municipal policies that authorized the clearance of homeless camps. His activism coincided with then-Mayor Dan Sullivan's proposal for a sidewalk ordinance that would have criminalized sitting or lying on downtown sidewalks. The City Assembly ultimately rejected Sullivan's proposal. Sullivan himself declined any meetings with Martin, explicitly citing protesters' criminal history as justification. Despite the challenges of street life, Martin never abandoned hope of reuniting with his Chinese family. Tragedy struck in 2014 when Martin was behind the wheel during a vehicle rollover that claimed the life of Margie Thompson, a woman with whom he'd been sharing living arrangements. Testing revealed his blood alcohol concentration at 0.12, exceeding Alaska's legal threshold. Prosecutors pursued manslaughter charges, but the first trial ended with a hung jury. A second prosecution produced the same frustrating result. Eventually, Martin entered a guilty plea to reduce misdemeanor charges. The summer of 2018 brought Martin's most audacious and internationally publicized attempt to reach his family. He acquired an 8-foot Walker Bay sailing dinghy, a vessel completely inadequate for ocean crossings. His provisions were equally minimal: fishing hooks, duct tape, a religious text, preserved salmon, pilot bread, drinking water, and grape juice. Employees at a fish processing facility in Emmenak witnessed his departure and considered his plan suicidal. One worker later recalled thinking the vessel was just the most unlikely boat imaginable. Coast Guard officials would subsequently express astonishment that Martin survived even the initial days at sea. Powerful wind systems blew Martin dramatically off course. In August 2018, his tiny dinghy washed onto the remote eastern coastline of Russia. Russian authorities detained him for approximately 5 months before finally deporting him back to the United States in February 2019. The improbable journey generated news coverage worldwide, cementing Martin's reputation as either remarkably determined or profoundly reckless, depending on one's perspective. Upon returning to Alaska, Martin resumed his existence on Anchorage streets. By June 2023, he had established a sleeping location behind the Global Credit Union utility box, a spot that offered some shelter from weather and passers-by. On the morning of June 15th, at precisely 4:58 a.m., a man approached Martin's sleeping area. Multiple surveillance cameras captured the subsequent events with chilling clarity. The individual aggressively yanked back the bedding covering Martin, startling him awake. For several seconds, the person stood directly over Martin, shouting. Then a handgun emerged, and the attacker fired 8 rounds at point-blank range. 7 bullets found their target, striking Martin repeatedly. Traffic surveillance systems tracked the shooter's movements after the homicide. At 5:08 a.m., merely 10 minutes following the shooting, cameras captured him walking into a nearby Burger King restaurant. When detectives reviewed this footage, they made a startling discovery. The individual wasn't fleeing the scene but reporting for his scheduled work shift. A supervisor at the Burger King identified the employee as 32-year-old Ryan Michael Dumbler, who held the position of shift supervisor. Police arrested Dumbler that same day. Inside his backpack, investigators discovered a Glock Model 19X handgun. Forensic examination confirmed that shell casings recovered from the murder scene matched this weapon. Prosecutors charged Dumbler with 1 count of first-degree murder and 2 counts of second-degree murder. Unlike many perpetrators featured in Alaska's notorious crime cases, Dumbler possessed no apparent prior criminal record, making his actions even more perplexing. The court set Dumbler's bail at $250,000 cash. His defense attorney's motion to reduce this amount was denied. In an unexpected development, Martin's own mother made emotional public statements requesting Dumbler's release, expressing fear for her personal safety and concern for community security, a position that baffled many observers. The trial commenced in November 2025. Assistant Attorneys General Heather Nager and Daniel Shai presented the prosecution's case, which relied heavily on the extensive surveillance video evidence. The footage captured every stage of the incident: Dumbler's approach to Martin's sleeping area, the abrupt awakening, the verbal confrontation, and the shooting itself. They introduced a Glock pistol along with forensic evidence conclusively linking it to the shell casings found at the scene. Defense attorney Rex Butler adopted an unusual strategy, declining to deliver an opening statement and explaining that he was waiting to see where the evidence takes us. He hinted at a possible self-defense claim, though observers struggled to understand how such an argument could succeed given video evidence showing Dumbler approaching Martin rather than vice versa. The jury required less than 3 hours of deliberation. On November 19, 2025, they returned guilty verdicts on all 3 charges. Judge Andrew Peterson scheduled the sentencing hearing for March 23, 2026. Dumbler faces a prison term ranging from 30 to 99 years. This case offers no satisfying explanation, no clear motive for why a fast food shift supervisor would execute a sleeping homeless man before calmly proceeding to work as if nothing had occurred. John Martin III lived a complicated existence that few could fully comprehend, a life marked by serious criminal mistakes, acts of political advocacy, improbable survival against oceanic odds, and steadfast determination to reconnect with families separated by international borders and legal restrictions. Whatever judgments one might render regarding Martin's complex legacy, few would argue he deserved to be shot 7 times while sleeping defenseless on a street corner. His story concludes not with meaningful resolution, but with unsettling questions about homelessness, the possibility of redemption, random acts of violence, and whether anyone can truly escape the shadows of their past. Ryan Dumbler remains in custody as he awaits sentencing. His conviction represents Alaska's most recent addition to a long and disturbing catalog of violent crimes that have shocked communities, devastated families, and left psychological scars that time alone cannot heal. Case 2. Stephen Harris Downs. April 26, 1993, Fairbanks, Alaska. In April 2018, investigators in California generated international headlines by using genetic genealogy technology to identify the individual they believe was the infamous Golden State Killer. Within mere weeks of that breakthrough, a homicide investigator working in Alaska sat at his desk, reading about the California case, when a thought crystallized in his mind. Perhaps this same innovative technology could finally resolve a mystery that had haunted the University of Alaska Fairbanks campus for a quarter century. Sophie Sergi was 20 years old during the spring of 1993. A young Alaska Native woman originally from a remote village of Pitcairn Point in western Alaska, she had been enrolled as a marine biology student at UAF but had taken the current semester off to work and accumulate savings. On Saturday, April 24th, she flew into Fairbanks for an orthodontist appointment scheduled for the following Monday. Her plans included spending the weekend with her close friend Shirley Allacock at Bartlett Hall Dormitory. Late that Saturday night, Shortly after midnight transitioned into Monday, April 26, Alacoque departed to spend the night at her boyfriend's room, allowing Sophie to use her bed. Before Alacoque left, Sophie mentioned her desire to step outside for a cigarette. Alacoque suggested using the bathtub area of the women's bathroom down the hall since the outdoor temperature was frigid. Those words represented the last time anyone would see Sophie alive. Around 2 p.m. Monday afternoon, custodial staff members discovered Sophie's body in one of the bathtubs. The medical examiner's subsequent findings painted a deeply disturbing picture of her final moments. She had been stabbed twice in the right corner of her right eye, wounds inflicted while she remained alive and conscious. She had endured a prolonged assault. Ultimately, her life ended from a single gunshot wound to the back of her head, fired from a .22 caliber handgun at close range. Investigators collected biological evidence from the scene, but in 1993, DNA technology had not yet entered regular use within Alaska's law enforcement agencies. The timing proved particularly challenging for the investigation. Finals week had just concluded, and students were departing campus in large numbers. Despite these obstacles, investigators conducted interviews with hundreds of students, including 2 roommates residing on the 3rd floor directly above the bathroom where Sophie's body had been discovered. One roommate was Nicholas Daza, who worked as a campus security guard. The other was 18-year-old Stephen Harris Downs, a freshman who had enrolled in 1992. Both individuals denied possessing any knowledge regarding the crime. Downs informed investigators that he had spent that night with his girlfriend, April Lee, on the 4th floor. One significant detail emerged during questioning. Despite campus regulations explicitly prohibiting firearms, Downs kept a .22 caliber handgun in the room he shared with Daza. Sophie's mother, Elena, subsequently filed a lawsuit against the university, alleging inadequate security measures. A $20,000 reward was established for information leading to an arrest, but the reward expired without generating viable leads. By the late 1990s, the investigation had gone cold, joining the ranks of countless unsolved cases. In 2000, forensic scientists successfully developed a DNA profile from biological evidence collected at the scene and uploaded it into CODIS, the National DNA Database. Yet years continued to pass without any hits or matches. Then came the Golden State Killer breakthrough. Sergeant Randy McFerrin of the Alaska State Troopers Cold Case Unit read extensively about genetic genealogy, a technique that compared crime scene DNA profiles to genetic information that ordinary citizens had voluntarily uploaded to public genealogy websites. In June 2018, McFerrin contacted Parabon Nanolabs, a company specializing in this emerging field. In September, they submitted Sophie's DNA profile for analysis. On October 10, 2018, exactly 25 years, 5 months, and 14 days after Sophie's body was discovered, Parabon contacted McFerrin with remarkable news. They had identified a very high probability match. The DNA profile matched genetic markers associated with Stephen Harris Downs' family. Specifically, the profile belonged to Downs' aunt, who had uploaded her DNA to a genealogy website seeking ancestry information with no awareness that her genetic data might be used for law enforcement purposes. Investigators discovered that Downs was alive and residing in Auburn, Maine, where he worked professionally as a nurse. Records confirmed he had been a UAF student from 1992 to 1996. He had lived in Bartlett Hall during spring 1993, occupying a room 1 floor above the bathroom where Sophie was assaulted and killed. On February 13, 2019, Maine State Police coordinated with Alaska State Troopers to contact Downs at his Maine residence. He told investigators he recognized Sophie from missing person posters distributed after her disappearance, but firmly insisted he had never personally known her. He reiterated his claim from 1993 that he'd spent that entire night with his girlfriend watching movies. The following day, investigators collected a DNA sample directly from Downs. When laboratory analysis was completed, the results were definitive. The DNA was a perfect match to DNA recovered from Sophie's body 26 years earlier. On February 15, 2019, Stephen Harris Downs was arrested and formally charged with first-degree murder and first-degree sexual assault. He was subsequently extradited from Maine to Alaska. The trial began in February 2022 in Fairbanks. Chief Assistant Attorney General Jenna Gruenstein and Assistant Attorney General Chris Donnell presented the prosecution's case, with DNA evidence serving as their cornerstone. April Lee, Downs' girlfriend from 1993, provided testimony that directly contradicted his alibi claims. She stated that contrary to his assertions of being with her throughout the night, he had actually been in and out of her room. The prosecution emphasized a crucial fact. Only Downs' DNA had been discovered at the crime scene, with no other genetic profiles present. Defense attorney James Howanick constructed his case around two primary arguments. First, he contended the prosecution had built its entire case on DNA evidence alone, lacking corroborating witnesses or physical evidence beyond the genetic material. Second, he raised constitutional questions about whether genetic genealogy had violated Downs' privacy rights. He also highlighted the fact that Downs had lived a law-abiding life for nearly 3 decades following the crime, working successfully as a healthcare professional. After deliberating for 2 days, the jury returned their verdict on February 10, 2022, guilty on both counts. Sophie's brother, Alexei, listened remotely to the verdict from St. Mary's, Alaska. He shared his reaction. "I feel relieved that the jurors found him guilty. With the DNA, I'm pretty sure it's the right guy. Nowadays, DNA won't lie to you." He also revealed his spiritual response. "You know, I'm Russian Orthodox. You're supposed to pray for all your enemies. Forgive them for everything. I forgave him for what he did, but I will never forget." Sophie's mother, Elena, had passed away in 2021 after Downs' arrest but before the trial reached its conclusion. Throughout 28 years of waiting for answers, family members recalled that Elena would suddenly burst into tears and pray for resolution. She never lived to see justice delivered. Sentencing took place on September 26 and 27, 2022. Judge Thomas Temple sentenced Downs to 75 years in prison, applying the sentencing laws that were in effect in 1993. Prosecutor Gruenstein reflected on the case's resolution. "For both Chris and myself, it was a real honor to work on this case given how long it had gone unsolved, how long the community, Fairbanks, UAF, Sophie's family had suffered. I think being able to provide some closure to the community is one of the best things that came out of this. It's another example of how helpful genetic genealogy can be. This is the first case that has gone to court in Alaska using this technology." Stephen Downs is currently serving his sentence. He has filed an appeal challenging his conviction on grounds that genetic genealogy violated his constitutional privacy rights. His attorney argues that using DNA information uploaded by a family member, without that person's knowledge it would be employed for law enforcement purposes, raises fundamental constitutional questions about privacy and unreasonable searches. Sophie Surge's case has become a focal point in ongoing discussions about missing and murdered Indigenous women in Alaska. The case demonstrated both the remarkable power of emerging forensic technologies and the heartbreaking reality that justice delayed can never truly equal justice delivered promptly. Sophie's family waited 26 years for answers, and her mother died without witnessing the person responsible being held accountable. Nevertheless, in the end, science caught up with a crime that had gone cold for over a quarter century, proving that even after decades pass, DNA evidence doesn't forget. And neither do the people who love the victims. Case 3, Kenneth Dion. September 28, 1994, Anchorage, Alaska. On the morning of September 28, 1994, 18-year-old Bonnie Craig departed from her family's residence in South Anchorage at approximately 5 a.m., rushing to catch the bus that would transport her to the University of Alaska Anchorage campus. She had a 7 a.m. English class and couldn't afford tardiness. The bus stop was located 2.5 miles from her home, a route Bonnie had walked regularly without any previous incidents. However, that particular morning, something went catastrophically wrong. Bonnie never boarded her bus. She never appeared at any of her classes that day. At 2:15 that afternoon, a woman hiking in the area near Mayhew Creek, located south of Anchorage, observed something that prompted her to immediately contact Alaska State Troopers. A body was floating face down in the creek, partially submerged in the cold water. When investigators arrived at the scene, they confirmed the victim's identity as Bonnie Craig. The medical examiner's findings revealed the horrific nature of what had transpired during the 9-hour window between when Bonnie left home and when her body was discovered. Her attacker had struck her repeatedly in the back of the head with a blunt object. 11 separate lacerations covered her skull in a pattern suggesting calculated, methodical blows designed to overpower and control her. Bonnie had also been transported to a cliff area and either thrown or placed over a 30-foot drop. The apparent purpose of leaving her body in Mayhew Creek was an attempt to either conceal evidence or allow the water to destroy it. Biological evidence recovered from Bonnie's body indicated she had been the victim of a sexual assault, and investigators meticulously preserved samples containing DNA from her attacker. Bonnie's life had been characterized by promise and service to others. Born in 1976, she had moved frequently during her childhood before her family finally settled in Anchorage in 1988. She attended Robert Service High School, where she graduated with honors in 1994. Bonnie had been a member of the school orchestra and had served as president of Students Against Drunk Drivers, a club she had helped establish following the loss of her close friend Katie Garcia to an impaired driver. At the University of Alaska Anchorage, Bonnie was pursuing a degree in psychology. Her family described her as someone who brightened every room she entered, a young woman with her entire future stretching ahead of her. The investigation commenced immediately, but leads proved frustratingly scarce. Weeks transformed into months. Months evolved into years, and no solid suspects emerged. The case eventually entered cold case status, joining the file cabinets of unsolved crimes. Bonnie's mother, Karen Foster, refused to accept that her daughter's case would remain permanently unsolved. She wore scarves and ties adorned with Bonnie's photograph to every court hearing and community event related to victims' rights. She channeled her grief into advocacy work, determined that Bonnie's story would represent something beyond tragedy alone. The breakthrough arrived 12 years later, though from an unexpected source. In 2003, a man named Kenneth Dion entered the New Hampshire prison system following his conviction for a series of armed robberies. Dion originally hailed from New Hampshire, but possessed significant history with Alaska. During the early 1990s, he had been stationed at Fort Richardson near Anchorage as a soldier in the United States Army. Following the completion of his military service, Dion remained in Anchorage for several years, securing employment at the Anchorage Hilton Hotel as a dishwasher. During this period, he had been arrested multiple times for petty theft offenses but never faced serious legal consequences. Eventually, he returned to New Hampshire, where his criminal behavior escalated dramatically to include armed robbery. When Dion was convicted of those robberies, authorities collected his DNA sample and entered it into CODIS, the combined DNA index system maintained by the FBI. In November 2006, the Alaska State Crime Lab conducted a routine search of CODIS, comparing the DNA profile from Bonnie Craig's body against all profiles stored in the database. After 12 years of waiting, they received a hit. The DNA matched Kenneth Dion. Alaska State troopers coordinated with New Hampshire authorities to arrange an interview. Investigator Tim Hunnier flew to New Hampshire to question Dion personally. During the interview, Hunnier presented Dion with a photograph of Bonnie. "No, I don't remember seeing her at all," Dion responded. He insisted he didn't recognize Bonnie and had never been in contact with her. Then Dion began discussing his extensive martial arts background, seemingly unprompted. "I grew up fighting all my life," Dion stated. He claimed to possess a 5th-degree black belt. "I'd carry a lot of weapons in my car," he explained, describing weaponry that included a dagger-shaped shaft with prongs along with nunchucks and a staff. That particular detail sent alarm bells ringing for investigators. Medical examiners had noted that the pattern of lacerations on Bonnie's head appeared consistent with a weapon similar to a sai, a traditional martial arts weapon with exactly that description. When investigators revealed that Bonnie had been found deceased, Dion became noticeably defensive. DNA was collected directly from Dion during this period. When laboratory analysis compared it to DNA from Bonnie's body, it was a definitive match. Kenneth Dion was indicted in 2007, but getting the case to trial proved to be an exhausting ordeal. Pre-trial motions began on November 14, 2007. The trial date was rescheduled 6 separate times. By the time proceedings finally commenced on May 10, 2011, there had been 33 pre-trial hearings spanning nearly 4 years. Karen Foster and her family attended every single hearing, wearing their scarves and ties emblazoned with Bonnie's picture, refusing to allow the justice system to forget. The trial lasted 21 days. Assistant Attorney General Paul Myovers led the prosecution, presenting DNA evidence as irrefutable scientific proof. They played the recorded interview during which Dion denied knowing Bonnie but described his expertise with weapons that could have caused her specific injuries. "There's no question this was a man that needed to be taken off the streets," Myovers told the court. If he had been, Bonnie would still be here. Defense attorney Andrew Lambert argued an alternative theory, that Dion and Bonnie had engaged in consensual sexual contact up to a week before her death, and that Bonnie had accidentally fallen from a cliff, striking her head on rocks during the fall. The jury found this explanation unconvincing. After deliberating for just a few hours on June 15, 2011, the jury delivered their verdict, guilty on all 4 counts. After 17 years of waiting, Karen Foster and her family finally had resolution. Sentencing took place on October 31, 2011. The Craig family had brought Halloween cookies to place at the prosecution table, a small gesture of celebration. However, the atmosphere shifted dramatically when Kenneth Dion was led into the courtroom, his shackled hands bearing tattoos that read "Lost and Soul." When Prosecutor Myovers detailed Dion's history of assault on other women, Dion erupted with anger. "That's a lie, man," he shouted. Myovers stated that Dion could never be rehabilitated unless he admitted to taking Bonnie's life. "And I never will, because I didn't do it," Dion shouted back. When Judge Jack Smith offered Dion an opportunity to address the court, Dion declined. "I have nothing to say at all." Judge Smith explained that several aspects of the offense meant the case fit the legal definition of a worse offense. The number and locations of the multiple blows to her head reflect a calculated, methodical beating, Smith stated. The purpose of leaving Bonnie Craig in the creek would appear to be an attempt to either hide or destroy the evidence. Judge Smith sentenced Kenneth Dion to the maximum penalty, 99 years for first-degree murder and 25 years for sexual assault, for a total of 124 years. Dion would be eligible for parole hearing in slightly more than 39 years. As Dion was led from the courtroom, the gallery erupted in applause. However, Karen Foster didn't stop her advocacy work there. Within 12 days of Dion's indictment back in 2007, she had mobilized the public in Alaska's legislature to pass groundbreaking legislation. The Bonnie Craig Amendment required that DNA sample be collected for all felony arrests in Alaska, not just upon conviction, but at the time of arrest itself. Karen's reasoning was powerful and compelling. If DNA collection upon arrest had been standard procedure in 1992 when Dion was arrested multiple times for petty theft offenses in Alaska, investigators would have identified him within weeks instead of waiting 12 years. During that 12-year window, Dion had potentially victimized others. Karen became a tireless advocate for similar legislation nationwide, traveling to Florida and other states to push for comparable laws. Kenneth Dion is currently incarcerated at Wildwood Correctional Complex in Kenai, Alaska. His appeals have been unsuccessful. He continues to maintain his innocence despite overwhelming scientific evidence. According to current records, he is scheduled for release in May 2090, a date so far in the future it feels almost meaningless. Bonnie's case highlighted a critical gap in the criminal justice system that cost precious years and possibly allowed additional victims to be harmed. The implementation of DNA collection upon felony arrests in Alaska has since aided numerous investigations and brought closure to families who might otherwise have waited decades for answers. Karen Foster transformed her unimaginable loss into meaningful legislative change, ensuring that Bonnie's legacy extended beyond tragedy to become a force for justice and prevention.